Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, America and world. We are coming to you today, the American Awakening Signs of Life team from around the country, coming to you on a very sad, ongoing sadness in America. America is on fire, both literally in a lot of cases, but also figuratively in our hearts, in our sentiments. And so we wrestle with that. We wrestle with that together with you. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But the theme of today's show will generally be, experiencing some measure of mournfulness and lament and sadness as we also look forward, hopefully, to the day that all these things will be set to right. And in that spirit, I'm going to kick it over to Josh Jacob. And Josh, what do you have for us, friend?
Yeah, thank you, John. I just kind of decided to go back to Advent. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. And so these are a mashup of songs of lament and hope, hopefully, so I hope you like this. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. Oh, God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appears. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Emmanuel, I shall come to thee, O Israel. Oh, come desire nations bound, all peoples in one heart and mind. Bid envy and strife and quarrels, please cease, and fill the whole world with heaven's peace. Oh, yeah, rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Down with thee is you, down with thee is you, need you right now. Oh, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water, and God's gonna trouble the water.
Thank you, Josh.
That was powerful.
Yeah, I can do another few loops of that one myself today. Thank you so much. It was first sung by the Disc Jubilee Singers in 1901. Wikipedia tells me. So it's got a great heritage there. Thanks for bringing that to us. And then the cut over to "O Come Emmanuel." That bit, is that your own riff on it? Or is that...
When I used to do this song in worship, we used to try to do a Pink Floyd version of it, and then I just kind of just like saddened it a little bit more.
There you go, Josh Baker, the only guy that will bring Pink Floyd to old Fisk spirituals. Love that about you, man.
That's awesome.
All right. So we have today our Monday lineup, which means our special partner, Andrew Hanauer in the One America movement, who will join us today, to, not only for the Love Your Neighbor set, but more broadly. And we are going to be talking about, thanks to you, Marissa, fighting for, not against our neighbors, which is a good word. We'll explore that in a little bit. First, over to you, Joel Searby in Florida with a Daily Dose.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, it's a tough day for, I hope for all of us in some way. And I know that may sound strange, but if we're not feeling in some way the deep sense that something is wrong in the world, then I wonder if we're fully awake and alive. But in that, there's a certain emotion that a lot of us are feeling, which is anger. And I got to say that, I am angry that George Floyd is dead. I'm angry that Ahmaud Arbery is dead. I'm angry that there's rioting and looting in the streets. I'm angry that there is injustice. And I'm angry at a lot of things. And I want us to know today that there is such a thing as righteous anger. Anger in and of itself is not an unrighteous emotion. There is action that comes from anger that is also inherently righteous. And so we need to, first of all, recognize that anger in and of itself is not a wrong emotion. You should not feel shame from anger. And if you want to challenge me on that, I'll take you straight to the scriptures where Jesus, out of his righteous anger toward the way that the people had treated the house of God, was turning over the tables and made a whip of cords and drove out these people who had defiled the house of God in an unjust and unfair way. They were taking advantage of the poor, is what was really happening, is what scholars tell us. And so anger in and of itself is not wrong. Of course, there is such a thing as unrighteous anger, and there is unrighteous action even flowing from righteous anger. But what I want us to hear today is that, number one, it's okay to feel angry. That is an emotion God has given us. That is an emotion God, the Godhead itself, appears to express. If you believe in the writers of Scripture, there is nothing wrong with feeling anger. I'm also not here, especially as a white upper class man, to tell you that you should or should not do certain things with your anger. I'm not going to do that. It's very difficult in the heat of the moment to know what exactly is the right thing to do with our anger, and especially in the response to the anger of others. So I don't know the answers to all that. Sometimes all we can do is just absorb and listen and weep and pray, at least in that moment. And we may be called to act. We may be called to step into some kind of righteous action that flows from our righteous anger. Other times we may be actually standing between someone who's about to do an unrighteous act out of their anger. I don't know how that's all going to play out in the coming days and weeks, but I want us to know that together as followers of Jesus, we can sit in that anger and we can share it. And I hope and I pray that we will find ways to navigate it by the power of God's Holy Spirit, and not just simply out of the flesh and what I want and what I want to see and what I need to do today, or something that'll make me feel better. So my prayer today, my daily dose, my encouragement to us today is that we would just simply say, here I am, I'm in this place. How can I be present with God and the help of the Holy Spirit, and take whatever emotions I'm feeling, and, oh Lord, help us that we can put them toward righteousness, toward justice, toward love, toward hope, toward togetherness. That's our call here at the American Awakening. That's my call to us today. That's your daily dose. Back to you, John.
Joel, thank you, man. And one of the things I am reminded of, I was reminded of, or maybe I was brought to my attention for the first time over the weekend, was that, of course, many of us are familiar with your Jesus in the temple moment, and a moment of Jesus' anger, which has been less familiar to me until this weekend, and having a close friend draw it to my attention, was with Lazarus and the death of Lazarus in John 11. When Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him. He was deeply troubled by the passing of Lazarus. And, that anger was not against the action of any person. It was an anger against the brokenness of all things, which the death of his friend represented, because death is unnatural. Death is really unnatural in some certain circumstances we know over this last week and weeks that have passed. But death is unnatural in all circumstances. We're not meant to go that path. And Jesus was expressing a deep frustration it's hard to capture the right words against the brokenness of all things. And in these moments, sometimes that's all we got. It's not great. It's not great. But if Jesus was there in that spot, then we can be there too. Thank you, Joel, so much as always. Appreciate that. Jeff Bethke, daily, no, not daily dose, something to chew on.
Daily something to chew on. It can be daily. You got to eat every day.
I'm befuddled.
Eat every day.
I'm a little out of it. Forgive me. Bear with me here.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, something to chew on. And I guess I just wanted to keep it a little informal today and not have a super, maybe huge point to pull from at the end, or make it all concise or distilled, but let you just know and let you in on what I'm chewing on and how I'm chewing on. And I've been talking a lot and sharing some resources over on Instagram. If you want to go see that, I love looking for the good in the conversations, the kind of the prophetic voices, the voices that aren't always rising to the top in the most common viral way. But on top of that, one thought I keep sitting on and chewing on myself, which I've alluded to, bits and pieces over the American Awakening, last couple months, Signs of Life, is this concept again of just power and what we see in Jesus, right? That Jesus is the one I follow, is the one that Christians follow. And do we actually let his life be an example to ours? Not just his words, not just his teachings, but do we let how he actually kind of positioned himself be an example to how we can follow and position ourselves? And, you see this clear dynamic in Jesus, who is God, the most powerful person in the world, yet he lays aside that power. Like, this is literally the inherent nature of the incarnation and of the Christmas message. And we see it all the way in the crucifixion on Easter and the resurrection. But he laid aside this power, or another way to put it is he laid aside his rights, right? In Philippians 2, this is the distilled version of that message. He laid aside his rights. He laid aside his power for what? For the sake of other people. And what's fascinating is when he did that, that actually implemented and ushered in the kingdom of blessing and peace and goodness and restoration that our world so deeply needed. And so I don't even know if I have one distilled moment past that, besides just, can we sit on that Jesus clearly showed the example of setting aside power, setting aside rights for the sake of other people. And it profoundly had a rippling effect in relationships, in economics, in society, in neighborhoods. And can we learn from that example? Because one of the hardest things for me to see is, even when people maybe enter this conversation with humility and understanding, but people get very feisty about their rights, and understandably so at some level. But is our allegiance as Christians subservient to whatever we think it means to have allegiance to America? Because that means different things to different people, as obviously this moment's showing. But what would it look like if we actually set aside our rights for the sake of other people, set aside our power, or our privilege is the word that a lot more people use today for that. And yeah, so that's just something to chew on. That might the life of Jesus speak to us in the way in which he actually went about things, not just what he said. And I think as we sit in that, it does have profound impacts on us and our relationships. So that's something to chew on. And back to you guys.
Good place to take us there, brother. I really appreciate that. Yes. What does it mean to set aside the standing or status or privilege or right that you have? A big open question for us all, for sure. Over to you, Calvin Lee, and what is happening out there, friend?
All right. What's going on, everyone? To our friends in the U.S. and all around the world, again, we see you guys. We love you. It's always so good to be with you. And yeah, like every show, just want to bring you a few headlines of what is going on out there. All right. So first off, the big news all across the country today is about demonstrators filling the streets across the U.S. to protest police brutality and the death of George Floyd. As of Sunday morning, approximately 5,000 National Guard members have been activated in 15 states and Washington, D.C., with another 2,000 prepared to be activated if needed. And on Sunday night, at least 40 cities and Washington, D.C. imposed curfews in response to protests. California ordered all state buildings in downtown city areas to be closed on Monday, and Governor Gavin Newsom declared a state of emergency in Los Angeles County. Arizona, Texas, Virginia, and Washington State have also declared either state of disaster or state of emergency. Since Tuesday, May 26th, is the day after Floyd's death, there have been about 4,000 people arrested across the United States during protests. Also, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz says he now believes that the local violence, arson, looting, and even shooting at police officers and firefighters is being fanned by well-organized groups that are trained in urban warfare tactics. He said similar attacks are also occurring in other cities and could be about domestic terrorism, ideological extremism, or even an international effort to destabilize the U.S. He said, and I quote, "There will be a legitimate exercising of First Amendment rights. But we're asking those people, as soon as those are done, to disperse and be out of the area. If you are out after 8, you are aiding and abetting these folks. You are making it easier for them, and you're giving them the cover that they want." Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, he said the people who are doing this are not Minneapolis residents. They are coming in largely from outside of the city, from outside the region to prey on everything that we have built over the last several decades. And lastly, protesters around the country are receiving support from an unexpected source, corporate America. After video circulated of Mr. Floyd's death on Monday, a wide range of companies like Nike, Twitter, and Citigroup have now aligned themselves with the Black Lives Matter movement. Twitter changed its profile image on the platform to black and added hashtag Black Lives Matter to its description. Mark Mason, the chief financial officer of Citigroup, wrote a public blog post on the company's website that repeated Mr. Floyd's "Please, I can't breathe" to the white officer kneeling on his neck. Nike released a new ad on Friday that was reposted by other shoe companies like Adidas and Converse. The spot said, "For once, don't do it. Beseeching people to stop pretending there's not a problem in America." So, there you have it, a few stories of what is going on in our country. And now back over to John to introduce our next segment, Love Your Neighbor, and Andrew Hanauer.
Thank you, Kelvin. Marissa, is there anything you want to add to all this before we move over to Andrew? You've been silent so far, and I hate any show which doesn't somehow profile you.
No, listen, I'm good. Thank you all for a bit of a vacay. I appreciate it today.
She's been carrying the load for 55 straight days. Yeah, amazing. 55 straight weekdays, business days. Marissa has put this show together and visualized it. and brought this team together. Thank you, Marissa, for that great service, to everybody out there, to all of us. And I guess I'll use this opportunity to mention that the streak will break tomorrow, folks. We're going Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I don't know. We may be forced to reconsider soon, but the commitment Marissa said in front of the world was we're going to be open for business every single day of the week during coronavirus to speak truth and light and life and faith and hope. And she lived up to that. Thank you, Marissa. And we've all been on that ride too. But at least in most places, the world is opening up some now. So Marissa's got a little license to say, okay, we can do it 3 days a week now. And that seems totally reasonable under the circumstances. But then all of a sudden this happens. And now you're like, what's that line from you know where I'm going there?
I don't, but I'm listening because I'm like, I'm waiting.
The Godfather.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Exactly. Yeah, starts to feel, how can we possibly start meeting every day? I don't even know. So, all right, with that, we're going to bring our guest in to talking about hashtag loving your neighbor. And Andrew Hanauer, of course, is very dear to us, the founder and head of the One America movement, bringing Christians, Muslims, and Jews together around this country. And hardly anybody out there gets what we're trying to do as much as Andrew does. So we always love to have him on. And he's coming from like a really cool place. Where is that, Andrew?
I'm in Vermont, and it's very quiet here, which is a very surreal place to be this past week. But I'm very grateful for getting to be up here. So thanks for not cutting my day too. You know, as a Monday person, I'm glad that we're not cutting Mondays.
You're special. We're keeping you.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Well, it's great to be with you all. I want to say, we've been doing this Love Your Neighbor segment for the last few months, talking about in the midst of quarantine and all the stress and fear and grief that comes with the last few months of coronavirus. We've been talking about how to love your neighbor, sharing stories of people doing positive things in their communities. I want to do a version of that today, but I wanted to start by basically echoing Joel. I mean, I think that first and foremost, there's so much pain in this country right now, and there's so much grief, sadness, and I think that the first thing that folks can do, and especially folks like me who are not as affected on a day-to-day level by racism, of course, is just to listen to other people's pain, other people's grief. I've heard from African Americans I know over the last couple weeks about wearing pink sneakers when they run so that they'll seem less threatening to people. I mean, just that kind of decision is something I've never had to grapple with. And so just hearing stories like that, it really hits home the extent of the problem that we have in this country with racism. And so I think first and foremost, one way to love your neighbor right now, especially if you're not as affected, is to just listen and to listen to people's pain and grief. I think that, we as a country right now have so much of that. In addition to 400 years of racism, right now we have folks who have been for the last few months in their homes. We have millions of people who lost their jobs, 100,000 people who have died from the virus. And so in this moment, there's a lot that needs healing right now, and it's going to be long-term work. And so I think part of the question of how we love our neighbors is what do we do in this week, in this moment, to support people who are affected? And then how do we long-term build the kind of country where what we saw in Minnesota with that police officer and Mr. Floyd never happens again? And that's going to be long-term work that requires all of us to be part of it. There's a story that we were going to discuss today, and I want to discuss it more as a point of discussion rather than as an example of anything specific, which is what happened in Flint, Michigan over the weekend during the protests, where a sheriff and protesters listened to each other, had a conversation. The sheriff took off his riot gear, put down his baton, asked the protesters what they wanted of him. They told him, they listened to him, they heard him out, then they said they wanted him to walk with them. So he marched with them. And I think it's a really important thing to discuss, because these viral moments, we love them, right? Oh, it's a good news. It's a thing we can latch onto. And I think there's a lot of praise to go around to the protesters and to the sheriff for how they acted in that moment. But I also want to discuss then what's next, right? How does that lead to long-term change? And how do we take these positive moments of loving our neighbors and build something from them? And I think that's the challenge that we face in this country. What do you guys think?
Whew. I'll jump in. I think anytime I see the positive viral stories, I'm heartened a little bit for a minute. Of course, you're not going to be angry at that, but I just always feel the cynicism rising up in me, and I don't like it. And so part of, I think, the question you're asking for me, Andrew, is like, what do I do with that cynicism around the positive news? Here we are trying to say, like, let's bring hope, let's bring light, let's bring all this stuff. And then our first reaction, or one of our first reactions to the good news stories is cynicism. Like, oh, PR stunt, or, oh, that doesn't change the actual policing that's happening in that city just because the sheriff walks with them for one day. Like, all the cynical stuff comes. And so I'm answering the question with the question to start with. It's like, and this is for our viewers and listeners too, how do we sustain it and not let our cynicism every time like quash the good stuff? Because, and Andrew, that's what your work with One America, that's part of what we're trying to do. I don't want to be a cynic. And so what do we do? How do we sustain the good stuff? And what does that look like?
I feel like, I'm listening again to everything. I'm trying to do a lot of listening today. From what you're saying, Jeff, it's time to listen, all of us. But, as you were talking, Joel, I was just thinking to myself, in a time, like if you're trying to rebuild a nation, which after Corona, after this, after like all sorts of things we're doing, it feels like a key question is like, do you really want this thing to work? Like this experiment of America, do you really want this thing to work? Because, at least for those of us, again, under a certain age, right? Like, we came on the scene after, civil rights movement, after suffrage, after all sorts of things. We've enjoyed peace, like relative peace. Not much has been asked of you. There hasn't been some like war that you've been drafted into. We've like enjoyed kind of just being able to do us. Then like the big stuff happens, stuff hits the fan, and we're all asked to sort of leave our comfort zone in favor of something that, like you were saying, might not serve you, or at least it might seem like it doesn't serve you in the short term. Like, do we all really want this? Because like the cynicism, I hear you, Joel, but I know you, so I know like you really do. Even though like we get tired of the difficulties, we come back together, and you come back to the table because you want this. But I think, again, how do you have perspective about America when you are an American and you pretty much like that's all you know? Even if you go around the world, this is what you live in. But I think we got to ask ourselves, man, like, yeah, this is going to be hard. This is not easy. There's hundreds of years of ish. But like, is there something here worth fighting for? And I think we got to get that squared away, because we all know that the stuff that we really want, we figure out how to make happen. You figure out how to get your cable, even if you don't have enough money. You figure out how to buy your sneakers when you maybe like you don't go out to lunch every day. But like, we figure out a way to get what we want, especially in this country. Is this something we really want?
That's good. Well, one thing I would add too, I love that, you guys, is just what I've been encouraged with, reading the last couple of days, is you have to build it into systems. You have to kind of bake it in, because if it's just going to be an emotional response, it tends to go away once there's not the need to show that anymore. You know what I mean? So you kind of have to bake it into the processes and the systems. And obviously we know there's huge levels that needs to happen at, but even tiny, small levels I've seen that I think are starts is, and these police forces aren't perfect by any means, but does seem clear on record that someone like, the Atlanta PD and then San Jose, some other police forces are at least stronger comparatively at the macro level than some of the other forces, even though they clearly have injustices as well. But two examples with them is, the Atlanta PD, their recruits have to actually go through the Civil Rights Museum as part of their training. And it's a visceral museum too, if you know it too, with even moments where you can sit at an actual lunch counter, put on actual headphones, where you were actually getting yelled at with profanities and things that were actually yelled at to people when they sat at those lunch counters. Like, that will do something to you, right? Especially as it's baked into the training, and also baked into the training in solidarity, where you're knowing the person next to you is getting that too, right? That you will then be out in the field with. San Jose, really probably one of my favorite pieces of content or videos I've seen come out the last couple of days, in regards to encouraging and hope, is the San Jose police chief. If you go to their Facebook page, I think it's just San Jose Police, I don't know, had this video where same thing, he's in the room with recruits and he's just kind of just reaming them at some level, calling it, giving a prophetic word at some level, and bringing in his black pastor friend, who's one of his good friends, and I think actually the pastor of the church he goes to, and letting him speak for a little bit, and there's just really powerful moments of how he just says, this is uncalled for, this is not okay, and leads with a couple moments of how they're going to not do that. And he shows the class the video, and of George Floyd, and they go through it, and and I can imagine how gut-wrenching that is, but there's something about that, baking that into the training, where it's actually coming at a very systematic level, I think is a tiny start, but a start nonetheless, for sure.
Yeah, I think accountability is a really key concept, Jeff. And I mean, we need accountability in to have justice. We need accountability in our systems, our structures, our policies, 100%. And I think on top of that, there's the accountability that comes from relationship. And so the question of whether this viral moment turns into something longer term is partly going to be a question of whether there's a real relationship between that sheriff and that community in a way that holds that accountable, and that holds the police force accountable to the people, holds the individuals involved accountable to each other in a way that builds something better. And I think that's the hard part. That's the part that we sort of wish there were shortcuts to. There's no shortcuts.
Well, I really, I love, as always, I love all your insights. That's a great structural point, Jeff and Andrew. But back to Marissa's point for a second, that's particularly compelling. Gut check time. What is it we're willing to sacrifice? What are we playing for? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Andrew and his group does well is a lot of us. I'll speak for myself, but I think I'm speaking for a lot of other folks. We assume that I'm holding my hand like this. This is the level of where we are right now, and we're sad because it's not better, right? I mean, fair enough, right? That's for real. But very few of us sort of think about, like, this is the level, and you have to even fight to stay at that level in some regard. And that if we're not willing to stay in the game, which is what Marissa's saying, I mean, Marissa's questioning, right? Asking, it can actually go a lot of different directions, mm-hmm. And that's what Andrew's work wrestles with all the time. We're not having to stay. And by the way, if you're listening on the pod, I'm holding my hand at a certain level here, and it's intended to imply a baseline. And the idea is we ought to improve off the baseline. And yes, we all want to. And of course, in these moments, we're like, yeah, we got to. But if we're unwilling to stay in the game, and open question, to Marissa said, of her generation and beyond, what are you willing to fight for? What are you willing to lay on the line? Because it can go badly the other way if we're not willing to fight for it. Andrew, you know what I'm talking about from your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are happening here that we've seen in other countries before really bad things happened. We work with people who used to work overseas who now work here because they're seeing the things here they used to see in those countries. And I think to Marissa's point, it's absolutely right. If we don't see a shared future together, why would we spend the time to try to figure out how to make it work? And I think what I would want to say, because I think all of us need to do a lot of listening, except when we're with our own folks, in which case maybe there's some things we can say. And what I'll say to my own folks, and my own folks being people who try to bridge divides, who try to fight polarization, if all we're saying is let's just be nice to each other, let's just calm this down. If we're not talking about why people are angry, why they're upset, why there's so much pain, we're failing utterly. And I think we're better than that. And I think most of us are attempting to do that. But this can't just be about civility.
So there's something about your question about what kind of country we want. Do we want this? What kind of country we want? And man, if there's ever been a time not to look back, I mean, who wants to look back right now? Like, there's just, you have to. I'm not saying we don't reckon with it. I mean, like, where do we want to go as people? Not, the government, us. It's us, right? We are us. And we have to say, what kind of future do we want? And what am I going to fight for? And, I hear there's so many like trite things that are said in politics, and they're mostly painful because they're referring to someone being left out. And I think it's just time to end all that. We have to be talking about the future that we want, not some past that we want to go back to. That's why I think Trump's slogan was so painful for so many people. I talked to my friends of color, like, make America great again. Like, it was never great for me. And so when we look back, and I'm using Trump as an example, but there's examples on the left that say we want something that is going to leave so many people behind and cause so much pain. Like, we have got to say, what is a compelling future vision? And I think that's what we're trying to cast here, right? Is like, it's got to be us together. It's got to be this really, yes, difficult, but beautiful kind of togetherness that says we're not going to give up. And
absolutely. No, absolutely. The good thing, I feel like, is that even in times like these where some people might be despairing, some people might be horribly angry, like some people might be, on the edge of poles, right? Some people just totally oblivious, and then some people, can't get out of bed and, are going to end it all. Most of us are somewhere in between there. And if you watch that video in Michigan, if you watch that, when people are looking at that sheriff, when he's talking about what he really wants and how he really wants to be there with them, and he will march with them, there's a joy in people's faces where it's like, maybe for the first time, at least in the last few days, maybe in a lifetime, they feel respected, they feel heard, they feel loved, they feel like, oh, like the thing I've been wanting, I'm getting. And I believe that with all of our problems, we all actually do really want to figure out how to do this thing together. Some people might not, we might be disillusioned. We might be, again, everybody might want to take a break. I get it. Take a nap. I get it. Get back up, though, because there's something on the inside of us that keeps coming for the others, that keeps coming. I don't know. We're having our difficulties, but it's as if just the humanity on the inside of you knows some kind of true north. There's something there. And, as a woman of faith, I'm declaring, I think it's got to be the way that we're wired. I think it's got to be the way that we're built. We are built for one another, way beyond what the one another's look like. So.
Wow.
Amen.
The true north.
That's good. I
like that. I like that. I'm going to keep going after this show because of that, Marissa. Thank you. All right. Well, we could keep going on this topic for a very long time. But we have a show to finish, and we have a great movie line to deliver. And I don't know. I mean, Jeff, this would happen before you were born, but man, this was a movie. This is a movie. I'll tell you, this one's epic.
Yes. Great pick again, Marissa. And what is it? Ben Kingsley's the actor in this one, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's one of the more underrated.
Yes,
exactly.
That's certainly
underrated, but guy, like, he's able to do so much, and he has such a prolific career. But yeah, this is one of them for sure. And so this is a clip from his movie Gandhi.
Oh, it's all over the world.
What can we do?
We must end the campaign. An eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. If we obtain our freedom by murder and bloodshed, I want no part of it.
They wouldn't stop even if we asked them to.
I will ask.
People are aroused. They won't stop.
If I die, perhaps they will stop.
There you go.
So good.
There you go.
I mean, again, this question of what are you playing for? This guy was playing for a more beautiful vision of something so big that he's flat out willing to give his life for them to be able to live the way they want to in that country. Who I don't know who's enraptured by that great a vision right now. Whoever it is, hopefully they'll start saying something, because there's a lot of people who want to hear it, I think.
Well, we don't like to think about the costs that have to be incurred, but the greats often pay the ultimate sacrifice for these things. Our Lord and Lincoln and Gandhi and King, because they were charting a path that people were not quite willing to go down, or at least not everybody was, that they actually paid a huge price. Yeah, and so just in the category of I mean, this is like maybe a nothing burger for some folks, not something interesting to them, but when recently we were reflecting on in the office, the American Awakening office, that when King died in 1968, he had a public approval rating in the 30s. So it's not as if that like it was like he came and everyone's like, oh yeah, great, it's fantastic, let's embrace him. No, it was a hard slog. It was death, and it was just public disapproval even to his death. And what's it going to cost? What are the headwinds? What's it take to do the right thing for whoever you are, wherever you're sitting? So, of course, now today, I mean, just to finish the story, is public approval rating is in the high 90s. You won't be surprised to hear, but there you go. So great to be with you all out there. We love you. We're thinking about you in the U.S., around the world. We have to wrap. We're wrapping with Josh still. We still got Josh Jacob.
I hope so.
There we go. I need a little more
Yes.
Josh Jacob in our lives. All right, Josh Jacob, bring us home.
All right. Thanks for the discussion, guys. It was awesome to hear. Yeah, this is another lament / hope song by a band called Citizens and Saints. So I hope you like it. I'm living in the land of death. The trees are burning gray. There's a smoldering smoke overhead, and the night looks the same as the day. It seems a miracle that I can't stand, when everyone I've known drifts up in the air with the ash every time that the wind starts to blow. But I feel alive with the life that's not mine. Your lies are streaming this wasteland, my lifeline, so much more than precious gold are your promises, my Lord. By their means your servant warned, and keeping them great reward. Your direction is marked in light. Your law secures my wounds. I will meditate day and night, and in season your harvest your fruit. Though a poison should threaten to kill, I know my Savior reigns. When the breezes of death leave a chill, I got Jesus' blood in my veins. So I feel alive with the life that's not mine. And I'm believing that that was your intended design. So much more than precious gold are your promises, my Lord. By their means your
giving them great reward. So much more than precious gold are your promises, my Lord. By the means you serve reward, and keeping them great reward. The kingdoms of man have all decayed. The ruins of progress turn to waste. The gods of greed lay in their graves. Darkness is everywhere. But there's a path in the dark that has emerged. I can see a great light beyond this curse. A brilliant blaze that is your word. A beacon of hope that burns. And I focus my captivated gaze on the radiant light from Jesus' face. The water of life is all I crave. Only your word remains. So much more than precious gold is this beauty I behold. Give me a glorious reward, knowing you, my King, my Lord. Ooh, yeah. Ooh, yeah.
Come on, Josh. Come on, Josh.
So good, man.
That is so strong. Thank you, Josh. Thank you for everybody who's out there, who's been with us from around the U.S., around the globe. We love you. We show up every day thinking of you. We pray for you every single day of the week. And we're going to get through this, folks, in the U.S., this tough time we're in right now around the world, this tough time of corona and unemployment and all sorts of dislocation. God made you to overcome. God made you to get beyond this adversity, and you're going to do that. Thanks again. Love you all. Keep fighting the good fight now.